Okay, good morning. My name is Toby Dennett, and I work in the strategic development section of the Arts Council. So I want to say, I think there's still people coming in, but we're going to make a start because I don't want to hold up everyone who has signed in. So listen, thanks for joining us this morning to hear more about our Arts Insight, our annual National Arts Engagement Survey undertaken for us by Behaviours Attitudes. What we're reporting on today is the 5th annual iteration of this survey, the first being in 2018. And that longevity is really significant on this survey. So the fact that we have 2 years of consistent data from pre-COVID, 2018 and 19, to be able now to compare with the 2022 survey makes this a really valuable asset for us in understanding what has changed and why. And that's a real focus of what we're here today. There's probably different levels of awareness and familiarity amongst you around this research. So just a reminder that this is a nationally representative survey with over 1,000 adults aged 16 plus from across the country. It covers arts attendance, participation, engagement at home, attitudes. And this is all geared, I suppose, towards supporting insights into our public engagement goal, that more people will enjoy high quality arts experiences. And this gives us a different perspectives from other audience engagement data that we collect. So obviously we do require that the arts organizations we fund tell us about their audience numbers, and we can count all of those attendances, but there's probably a limit to what we can learn from that. So it won't necessarily tell us, who those audiences are precisely, the demographics, why they have attended. And obviously organizational data on attendance can only tell us about those people who do attend. This survey tells us about those that do and those that don't attend, participate, engage in the arts. It tells us something about who they are, where they are, and what their attitudes and other behaviors are. And it tells us about what drives or influences those behaviors. And remembering, of course, that the goal is that more people will enjoy high quality arts experiences. When we ask the public directly, we can, and we do in this survey, ask them about their experience of engaging. What is it that they enjoy? So before I hand over to John, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Alice Ryan, who is Head of Insights and Public Engagement in the Arts Council. And Alice has really been working with us for since the beginning of the year on this, and really is focused on getting more out of this survey and supporting the Arts Council and the sector to make more use out of it, to really learn whatever we can out of the significant resource that we've developed here over the past number of years. So before I do, I just want to say one thing about the process today. We have a chat. The chat function has been turned off, but there is a Q&A function. So if you have a question, put it into the Q&A and we'll respond to that at the end. And the session is being recorded and we'll be putting that up online. So before I hand over to John from BNA, Alice, can I hand over to you?
Thank you so much, Toby. And just really a quick word, mainly of introduction of myself. As Toby said, I'm relatively new to the role, although I've been in the Arts Council for 2 years. So the role is I'm Head of Insight and Public Engagement. And really, as Toby said, I've been delving into this BNA research and just trying to make the most of it, trying to make sure that we as the Arts Council are really taking these insights on board and that it's informing our decision making and all our work processes. So I've been working really closely with all my colleagues across all the art forms to pull out key insights and to help us understand how we can better support the sector and the public to engage with the arts. So I guess, and I'm sure there'll be time at the end for further questions and answers, but my door is very much open in terms of how any questions that you might have in relation to the data and also how you can better use it in your particular art form. But now over to the absolute meat of the piece. And again, just to reiterate what Toby is saying, we're so thrilled to be working with BNA on this, because that kind of robust data that's in person surveys, and pre and post COVID, it's a really, really valuable piece. So I'm delighted you're all here, and over to John from BNA.
Oh, thank you, Alice. And thank you, Toby. And good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here with you this morning and to have the chance to take you through the findings of Arts Insight 2022. So as Toby and Alice mentioned, it's a nationally representative survey. It's conducted via face-to-face interviews. It has a sample of over 1,000 adults. So it's designed to be very rigorous in terms of reflecting the public views. And it has, the sample size is terrific, and that allows us to analyze the results in a whole range of different ways, which I'll illustrate to you as we go through it. So in terms of the sections of the questionnaire, the way the questionnaire works is that it's a full and comprehensive survey questionnaire, and it has the following sections. So we go into art attendance, then we go into digital arts engagement, then there's information sources about, retrieving details about arts events and activities you want to attend or participate in. Then there's a full section on participating in the arts, which also includes some questions on reading for pleasure. And then finally, there's a section on our general national attitudes towards the arts. And as Toby mentioned, one of the key thing perhaps here is that in addition to the questions we ask, it's how we can compare how people have responded to those questions over time. And we did this research pre-COVID. We also adapted it during COVID. But in the presentation this morning, what I'd like to do is in particular draw comparisons between 2022 and 2019 and 2018 and show you how things have changed sort of pre and post-ish COVID. The research itself was done late in 2022, and it gives the patterns in here are really interesting and intuitively make a lot of sense. So I'll start with art attendance, but the first slide here is about more broader leisure interests. So the question was to all adults, which of these leisure activities do you participate in at all nowadays, and which do you participate in regularly, say at least once a week? And here are the results. Now, there's a lot of data here, so I'm just going to quickly point out a few things. Our key leisure activity is spending time with friends and family. Then after that, it's listening to music. Over 50% of the population eat out at restaurants, watch on-demand TV, watch TV channels, use social media, and so on. So there's a broad range, all the way down to visit a public library and attend a book club. And those are interesting in itself. But what we can do is, and what the reason we put the question in this year or in 2022 was that we can compare directly back to pre-COVID 2019 and see how some key activities have changed. And there were sort of, it's about a handful which really showed the dynamic. The key one is that spend time with friends and family. That figure in 2019 was 86%. So last year it went down by a full 11, and it was so indicative of what we've been hearing through other research, whether quantitatively or qualitatively, that people's social lives had not returned to their pre-COVID norms at all. And they were far more selective in their social outings and engagements. The other ones that were, there was a big drop off in reading magazines, which had been supplanted really by online media. The ones that had increased was we were far more likely to be taking part in exercise. We were far more likely to be going leisure shopping for clothes. Certain things had bounced back considerably, but the exercise one was very apparent during COVID. And also we were much more likely to be playing video games, and that was very true naturally of young adults. But if we focused in particular on this spending time with friends and family and that drop, it was evident everywhere, but it was particularly evident amongst women, down 13%. It was particularly evident amongst young adults. We define those in research as those under the age of 35. Particularly evident amongst C2DEs, that's the social grade, typically referred to as white collar, blue collar. You know, it's a helpful guidance of some sort, and also particularly apparent outside Dublin. So leisure profile, it showed a series of changes from pre-COVID, the most striking being the decline in spend time with friends and family. So within that context, if we move on then to arts attendance in the past 12 months, again, this was asked late in 2022, and we asked people, and we've always asked this question, which of the following types of events have you been to in the past 12 months? And 72, there's a whole range of events here, from films to rock or popular music, to street art events, traditional Irish folk music, country music, plays, arts exhibitions, musicals, stand-up comedies, all the way down to ballet. And there's always been a strong level of attendance in Ireland. 72% of us have attended at least one of these type of events. And right at the top here, we have any core arts activity event. Now that's a guideline, really. And that's a sort of a way we review the data, because these are types of events that are typically supported by the Arts Council. But it's not a specific, it's more a reference group rather than a specific. We don't ask people individually what type of event they went to in terms of did it have Arts Council advertising and so on. So it's just a guideline. But the big ones there have always been films, and then any music which aggregates rock and popular music, country music, and so on. And you can see there are 3 tiers. There's our summary code here, the top 2 of films and any music, and then there's sort of this middle group which starts at rock or popular music and ends at stand-up comedy. And then after that we have the lower tier, which starts at traditional Irish folk dance all the way down to ballet. And again, when we looked at the figures from pre-COVID, what we saw was a consistent set of modest declines in national incidence of attendance across practically every event type. But the biggest ones were in Arts Council, typically supported by the Arts Council, down 7. Cinema was down 4. Any music was down 2. Musicals were down 6. Plays were down 4. Now, though that's 4% less people nationally, but that can have a huge impact on attendance. You see, when you look at, let's say, musicals, it was 16%. Now it's gone down to 10, which is about a 40 to 50% drop. So that all these percentages here of -6, -4, -2, they look somewhat modest on a national scale, but in terms of tickets sold, it has a massive impact. And we illustrate that further when we talk about frequency of attendance. But that's what we were seeing, as consistent set of modest declines. And the same was true then when we asked about attendance, or asked about venues. In which of the following venues have been attended an arts event in the past 12 months? And we saw that cinemas were down 2%. Attendance in pub hotels, which really was a national characteristic in terms of Ireland's arts attendance, that was down 6% since COVID. Open air venues were down 5, church down 5, community centre down 5, theatres were down 8, art galleries were down 5, libraries were down 2. And again, those types of venues typically supported by the Arts Council were down 8 in total. So the incidence of adults attending any core arts activity venue was down 8% on 2019, 8% on pre-COVID. If we look at that then demographically, see, here's one of the things you can do, a nationally representative survey. You have all the total figure, what the national incidence is, but you can break that down by gender, various age groups, region, social class, and you combine these and they just result in the total figure. So it showed that the decline in incidence from 2022 to 2019 was apparent across practically every demographic group. The only variation really was by age. It was lower, the decline was lower amongst young adults. It peaked amongst 35 to 49 years, typically referred to as more likely to be the family life stage. The decline was as evident in Dublin as it was outside Dublin, and evident across social grade as well. So apart from young adults, the decline was consistent across all the demographic groups. So if we summarize this, what we learned was that just the comparison between 2022 and 2019, in 2022, 72% of adults attended an event, any event. Pre-COVID, it was 76%. In terms of any core arts activity events, it was 52% 2022, 59% pre-COVID. And you look at those figures and you go, well, they're not so bad. The impact of COVID was so significant, so severe, that a 4% drop or 7% drop, is of course damaging, but not, survivable. But then we brought in frequency, and here the changes really start to manifest itself, the overall impact. In 2019, we were on average attending 7 events 7 times a year. And that reduced as well in 2022 to 5.4. The same was evident in any core arts events. Now, when you multiply those together, 72 by 5.4 is 76 by 7, then the decline became really stark. You had a 28% decline in attendances since 2019, which is massive. You have in mind a figure then of about 30%. Your attendances, your ticket sales going down by, on average, close to a third. And this decline was largely consistent demographically. Again, it peaked amongst that family age group of 35 to 49 years. When you were focusing on those events and art forms that the Arts Council typically supports, the decline was just over 30%. And then if we looked at the decline across all different art forms, then we saw the real impact. So with films, we were talking about, well, there's been a 2% decline in attendance and so on. But when you factor in frequency, cinema attendance was down 25%, plays 40%, traditional music 17%, comedy gigs 32%, classical music 26%, country music 24%. Everywhere there were these huge declines. And this was the real impact we were looking at of COVID on the arts sector. So 72% of Irish adults attended an event in the past 12 months, a decline in incidence of only 4% from the pre-COVID figure. The challenge, however, particularly relates to frequency, which has reduced to an average of 5.4 events a year in 2022. The overall estimate for decline then was 28%. So what we were looking at was that you might see the same faces. The actual number of people in a room who were attending events was similar to pre-COVID. The fact was, though, that their frequency had dropped and dropped significantly. And that had led overall to this 30% drop in attendances or 30% drop in ticket sales. That's how it was looking. So it was very important that we asked those two measures. And actually we followed up and we asked people what were the barriers to attending preferred events. And we only asked this question to those people who had said, I really wish I was or I could attend more often. And there was sort of a key set. There's a whole series of reasons we offered to people and they volunteered. It costs too much. It's difficult to find the time. So cost and time concerns were the main two. Limited choice, poor quality. This type of event where I live was 21%. It's too far to travel, 15%. I'm still nervous about COVID. Public events, 14%, all the way down to I might feel uncomfortable or out of place at that type of event. And when we looked at that demographically, we saw some big changes. It reflected the context in which the survey was conducted. So it cost too much rose to 49% in Dublin. And it's difficult to find the time, was much higher amongst that middle age group, 35 to 49 years, and also higher amongst ABC ones. Also look at this. I'm still nervous about COVID and public events. That spiked heavily amongst those who were aged 50 years plus. And we know from past research how vital an attendee group they are, the people who are over 50 years, and how loyal they are to art forms and how regularly they attend. So they were being very explicit in terms of the impact COVID was continuing to have on them late last year. But what we shouldn't rule out as well was that you had this double whammy. Not only was it COVID, but also then the relaxation of COVID-related restrictions were then accompanied by the cost of living crisis. And that was something that we saw not only in these figures, but also later on when we looked at the national attitudinal statements in relation to arts attendance. So that, those two things combined were causing that tremendous fall of 30%. So if that was who was attending and how often they were attending or not attending, as the case may be, we also asked a question about evaluation of their most recent experience. So we said, thinking about the last event you attended, how would you rate it overall, and then how would you rate it in terms of value for money. And typically we ask this in the 10-point scale. So the happier you are, the more satisfied you are, the higher the score you give. And it usually works that those who give a score of 9 to 10 are absolutely delighted. And those who give a score of 7 to 8 are positive, but there's a but. There's something holding them back, something that if it hadn't been there, they would have enjoyed the experience more. And those who give a score of 1 to 6 are typically dissatisfied. And the results here were very good, very strong. You had 57% saying they were extremely satisfied, and that was even stronger than it was in 2019. You know, when you're looking at a score like this, I suppose the higher you go beyond 50, the more encouraging it is. And once you get to a 9 to 10 score of into the 60s, then that's very positive indeed. And so in absolute terms, there were good results, but also relatively, there was this big increase. But then we also asked about value for money. And here we saw the movement in reverse. Previously, at this, or 2022, 40%, 41% of people said the value for money was excellent, or they were extremely satisfied with it. But that figure in 2018 was 50%. So a full drop of 9 percentage points. And, you know, that was definitely a warning sign. And that decline in the value for money score would likely be a function of ticket price increases, and also cost of living concerns. And so that, you know, entirely natural to respond to COVID with changes in relation to your pricing system. But it was happening within the context of people feeling the pinch in terms of their domestic finances and personal finances. So that compounded the worrying trend. On a brighter note, however, and we very much appreciate the Arts Council's remit in terms of broadening out audiences and broadening out national engagement in the arts. We asked people, all those who attended an event in the past 12 months, had they attended any event for the first time? Were they, you know, a new event for them? And the results were fantastic. 38% of people, of attendees, said they had attended an event for the first time. Often it was a music event. 5% had attended a rock or popular music concert for the first time. 5% country music. 3% had attended a stand-up comedy gig for the first time. So 38% of all attendees had attended a type of event, a type of art form, if you like, for the first time. And in terms of those events traditionally or typically supported by the Arts Council, 22% of attendees had attended that type of event for the first time. And it was, so that was encouraging. And that breakdown by age was reasonably consistent, smaller amongst young adults, higher amongst 35 to 49 years, and strong again amongst that group 50 years plus. And then we asked people about the future, about their intentions for the next 12 months. So for this year, 2023, do you think you will attend these events in the next 12 months more often, less often, or about the same as you did this year? And in terms of all adults, you had 38% saying that their intentions were to attend more often in the next 12 months this year. And when you looked at amongst people who had actually attended last year, there were 45% said they would attend more often. So let's just focus on this figure. So 39% of all adults said they were more likely to attend this year. And that figure was much stronger amongst younger adults and those under the age of 50. And it was quite even Dublin and ex-Dublin. So there were, amidst the challenging results from the 2022 survey, there was this note of a silver lining. However, there's always a word of caution with results like this, in that these are people's intentions. And typically what you would have here is that when you're looking at these two boxes, we'd make a big distinction between will attend much more often in the next 12 months and will attend a little more often in the next 12 months. And that what we typically find is those people who select the top box are much more, well, their intentions are much more reliable. if you like. So overall, the figure was 39%, but really there was a strong indication by about 1 in 10 people, which is still encouraging. And again, these intentions were broadly similar across age group and location. So I appreciate there's a lot in that section around arts attendance, but here's some of the key headlines on it. Significant decline in attendance since COVID, but some promising signs for the next 12 months, 2023. 72% of Irish adults attended an event in the past 12 months, a decline in incidence of only 4% from pre-COVID. The challenge, however, particularly related to frequency of attendance. The estimate for decline in actual attendance is 28%. So the challenge really, it seemed, for arts venues, organisations, was to encourage the audience they had to return to levels of frequency of attendance that they had previously seen pre-COVID. For those adults who volunteer, they are now attending less. The reasons given primarily relate to COVID and changes in broader lifestyle since COVID. Barriers to future attendance focus on time and cost concerns. Of note here is the perceived value for money from attendance in 2022 is well down in pre-COVID. More positively, 22% of attendees in the past 12 months attended a type of core arts activity event for the first time. So the new recruits were still coming in, and there are promising signs of attendance bouncing back next year, this year. 39% of adults plan to attend more often in 2023, rising to 45% of 2022 attendees. So a tough picture for 2022, as you well know, but at least some suggestions of a better 2023. Okay. Naturally in the Q&A, we'll come back to any comments you have around attendance. But let's move on now to digital arts engagement. And this is a module of the questionnaire that showed naturally huge variation as we went through COVID. And the type of questions we ask are like this. Which of these have you done in the past 12 months? And we have a whole range of things you'd be familiar with. Watch movies on TV, watch movies on on-demand services like Netflix, listen to recorded music on the radio, listen to music online, use catch-up services like RT Player, Sky On Demand, listen to music you own, download, stream, or watch a movie online, listen to music online such as Spotify, listen to plays or other dramas on the radio, use the internet to improve your skills. There's a whole range there. And naturally, as you'd expect, the big players are feature more prominently here at the top of the list. The big changes were evident when we looked at behaviours now in 2022 and versus 2019. And the one that really stood out was that this huge surge in people who are now watching movies or TV dramas through paid on-demand services. So Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, and so on. And so that was the big digital change. Our greater use of on-demand streaming services manifested there in front of us, a huge change of double-digit growth in that. The other thing we can look at is the age differences, and that ultimately, when we reviewed it demographically, and you remember demographically, there weren't sort of huge changes in relation to arts attendance, but digital engagement, there's among just the extent of the engagement and the depth of engagement amongst the young adults, those under 35 years, is on a completely separate, higher level. They are 15% more likely to be using Netflix or Disney Plus, much less likely to be listening to the radio, much more likely to be listening via Spotify or YouTube, much more likely to be using catch-up services, much more likely to be downloading or streaming movies online, much more likely to be listening to music online, paying for it via Spotify or YouTube. So huge age differences there. And we'll come back to that in terms of the information sources people use. So here were the changes. When we looked at everything regularly, when we compress it all for any movies and TVs, any music, the changes in relation to the amount of people consuming movies and consuming music wasn't that different. It was mainly a function of how they were doing it. Here, more likely to be looking at the paid streaming services. Here, the same. Netflix up here, Spotify here. The one that we noted where, in terms of digital engagement, where there hadn't been a big change, and the only area where there wasn't really a big, a higher incidence among the younger age groups, was in digital engagement in relation to any arts and drama. Here, 24% had done it past 12 months, and you'd expect that to swell, particularly for young adults. But it didn't really. It increased a little bit to 28%. And so what you have there is, in relation to adults engaging with arts and drama in a digital format, the challenge was to drive this audience to a higher incidence amongst the younger age group, who, again, in terms of their digital engagement elsewhere, were at a completely separate and higher level. Okay, so what we've noted now about broad digital engagement in terms of our personal lives, how might that also have affected how and where we're getting information about arts events and activities we'd like to attend or participate in? And again, here our analysis of the results was hugely facilitated by this pre and post COVID analysis we could do. So here are the results for 2022, and intuitively they seem absolutely what you'd expect. Television tops the list, so 37% of adults use the TV to find out more about the arts events and activities they're interested in. 35% use social media, 32% word of mouth, 26% local radio, 23% online websites, 21% national radio. So the change, though, is when we look at how those patterns, our use of media sources, has changed since pre-COVID. So we're only talking a 3-year gap. And these are absolutely huge. You know, in terms of the research results, I typically look at, you know, a movement of 3, 4, 5%. A movement of about 1% a year would be, you know, much more akin to the normal. Here we're looking at social media, and its use in relation to sourcing information about the arts had rocketed since COVID, up 12%. And where were and also our use of online websites. And where were the corresponding declines? Television. Then when I say right at the top there, also when we went down, local newspapers, down 7, national newspapers, down 8, national TV advertising, down 6. So huge swings in the sources we were using. If we summarize that and just look at, you know, aggregate those options into any television, radio, newspaper, and online, then it's sort of the dominance of online and the trade-off with everything else. Our use of online sources since COVID had gone up 14%. And in comparison, or in contrast, our use of newspapers as sources on the arts had gone down 12, radio had gone down 6, and television had gone down 10. This huge move away from traditional media to digital media. So our sources for finding out more about the arts have changed significantly since COVID. The prominence of television and online sources has switched, and the decline of newspapers is clearly apparent. And that was it nationally. And then you looked at it for the young adults, and the change was even more stark. Any online was 49% for all adults, 70% for under 35s. Newspapers, 23%, so in decline anyway, 15% for young adults. Radio, 37%, 23% for young adults. TV, holding up a bit better, but still a sharp dip, 33% for young adults. So this complete change, shift, national shift in the media sources we use. And so if we concentrate a little bit more on online media sources and which social media sources they used for online information, there were, you know, it was still dominated by Facebook. But there were some very important shifts here as well. Facebook had gone up in terms of its pre-COVID usage, but Instagram had gone up by a full 12%. So it had been 20%, so it gone up to 32. So actually that means that its increase in sort of within itself was over 50%. Twitter had gone up from 11 to 17, again, a rise of 50% or so. So absolutely huge shifts in usage. So 80% of online adults overall have used an online media source for information about arts events and activities in the past 12 months. Time comparisons show significant rises for each of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then once we'd established usage and where people were finding information about the arts, we then established satisfaction. So how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the availability of information about arts events and activities? Here we used a 5-point scale: very satisfied, satisfied, neither, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. And the figures here were very satisfied was 21% and satisfied was 55%. So overall, you have 76% of all adults were satisfied with the information they were getting about art events and activities. And pre-COVID, that had been 73%. So a slight increase. And again, what they were talking about in 2019 was primarily receiving information via traditional media. Now, in 2022, they were talking about their satisfaction with primarily receiving information from online media. And in terms of there were changes in satisfaction amongst the various age groups, and satisfaction peaked amongst the young adults. So therefore, it was peaking amongst those using online sources, and dipped amongst those 50 years plus, down to 71%. And that's still positive. But the big difference here is that the young adults are primarily retrieving information online, and those 50 years plus are much more reliant on traditional media. So it seemed like those people who were retrieving their information online were more satisfied. Okay, so we've gone through attendance, physical attendance. We've looked at digital attendance or digital engagement. And then we've shown what the impact has been in relation to information sources. And in each area, we're seeing big changes, big shift, unfortunate shift in attendance, big rise in digital engagement, and this big shift in information sources used about the arts. So now the survey switched its focus to actual participation in the arts across all the various forms that can take. And just to give you an idea of the type of things we were looking at, when we mean participation, we were talking about singing or being part of a choir, music, playing a musical instrument of any kind, dance activity of any kind, visual arts and crafts, drama or theatrical activity of any kind, film and video making, creative writing, book club, digital arts, circus skills, and other. And if we go back and just any participation in that in 2022 was 21%. So just over 1 in 5 Irish adults participates in the arts in at least one of those ways. And this is a figure that's fluctuated hugely over time. What had happened was in 2018, pre-COVID, it was around the 28 to 25 mark. Yeah, so an average of about 26, 27. Then we had seen it shot up in 2020. In that first year of COVID, it was really striking that we were trialing out a whole series of new behaviours when in adapting to lockdown. I remember reading shot up as well. And of course, it was facilitated a lot by online access to arts participation and our desire to take form in sort of communal digital forms of engagement. And then as we went into 2021, that fell off a cliff. And all the people who had been recruited went away and it was down to 15%. However, what we saw last year was that participation in the arts was again on the rise as COVID smoothed it out. 21% of adults participated in some art form in the past 12 months, which was again much more comparable to the figures we had seen pre-COVID. Not matching it just yet, but much more comparable. And if we looked at it and looked at all the different art forms, there's that 21%. we saw that the overall increase was a function of positive movements across practically all disciplines. It was all those little movements. Remember when we looked at arts attendance, it wasn't just that one art form had fallen off hugely, it's that there was a little decline across practically all art forms. In art participation, we saw the reverse of that, sort of a positive movement, and that there were these increases across practically everything. Singing was up 2, music of any kind was up 2, dance activity was up 3, visual arts was up 2. Again, these might be 1 or 2% rises, but on a national level, that means a huge amount. Now, what we also looked at was when with people participating in the arts, we said, well, how are you participating? Is it online or is it in person? And what we saw was that participation was now again dominated by in-person activity, and that involvement via online, which had caused that spike in 2020, had retreated to a much more niche proposition. So the participating in the arts was again very much an in-person activity. And just going back to this overall figure of 21%, it showed the sort of demographic pattern it typically did, which was higher amongst women, higher amongst young adults, and higher amongst ABC1s. But again, what we saw here was that the year-on-year rise in participation was evident everywhere. Higher amongst men, women, young adults, those 30 to 49 years, senior adults in Dublin, outside of Dublin, across social grade. So again, that national increase really was a national increase. And just as we had with attendees, we also did the same analysis in relation to new recruits for arts participation. So these were the numbers of arts participants who had participated in an art form for the first time. And it was terrific. It was 47%, so a striking 47% of arts participants had attended a new activity in 2022. Now, they may already have been doing something else. It may have been actors who also joined a choir, or dancers who got involved in drama, or so on. But 47% of participants had tried something new in 2022. And that was very consistent across the age group, and even peaked outside Dublin. So again, another impressive indication of the willingness of us as a nation to try new things when it comes to the arts, whether it's attending new types of art forms or events, or whether it's participating in new arts activities. Reasons for participation in the arts? Well, these have always shown a particular pattern. So when we ask people, what were your reasons for taking part in whatever event they were, they always mention enjoyment and pleasure. So the fun, the thrill of actually participating, that strong emotional satisfaction we get. After that, learn new skills, improve their confidence, the social element of friends taking part. All of these are important. And all of these, of course, add to the first, but it's really the strong emotional pull of fun, enjoyment, and pleasure that's the key one. And in terms of new participants, so that big group who were trying something new, that was equally important for them. But just to say, this idea of learning new skills, improving their confidence, and friends taking part were even more prominent for new recruits. So enjoyment, pleasure remains the dominant reason for participating in the arts. The key other reasons relate to learning new skills and improving confidence. There's within the broader subjects of the questionnaire, we also typically have separate modules on certain things, whether it be certain events or festivals or certain activities such as reading. We've had a question on Culture Night over a number of years because it is a national event and this is a national survey. And we've tracked awareness of the night a number of times. And this was one that had typically shown very strong awareness levels and continued to do so. But there had been a dip in 2022. And this, of course, may be related to the different media sources that people are using to access information about arts events and activities, as we saw in the earlier section. But so we had a sort of an average which was just around the 50 mark, and 41% were aware of Culture Night in 2022. Still very impressive in terms of an awareness level, a national awareness level. And when we looked at that, it was higher amongst ABC ones, and it was also higher amongst arts people who participate in the art, enthusiasts, which is the group that we refer to who are frequently attend arts events, and also is higher in Dublin. And then, but when we looked at actual attendance amongst those who are aware, this is where we saw a very encouraging sign, in that those people who are aware of Culture Night were much more likely to now attend it. So the conversion of awareness to attendance was much stronger. 49% of those aware of Culture Night had attended it, which is hugely encouraging and much superior to what it was in previous years. And whether they attended it in person or whether they attended it virtually was an important distinction. It was driven primarily by virtual attendance. So awareness for Culture Night, while still strong, declined in 2022. The conversion from awareness to attendance in some form, however, has increased. And if we looked at that decline in attendance, we saw that it was apparent demographically everywhere, but particularly peaked amongst this group of 35 to 49-year-olds, and also peaked amongst the ABC1 or the middle class social grade. And the thing to note here is that we'd also noted that this was the group who had shown this most significant decline in actual arts attendance overall in 2022. So there was that commonality in relation to that. So decline in awareness most evident amongst one of the strongest constituents for Culture Night, this group here and ABC ones. And then finally, in relation to participation, we had a question on reading for pleasure, just to give you an indication of what national readership levels are like. So we asked Irish adults which of the following had they read for pleasure in the past 12 months. It could be a work of fiction, a biography, other non-fiction, or factual reading relating to the arts. And overall, 56% of Irish adults had read at least one of these, naturally driven primarily by works of fiction, but 26% had also read a biography or autobiography. And that figure had it's consistent now year on year to what it was in 2021. It was still well below the levels we'd seen in the past. What we'd seen was that reading was very high pre-COVID, then peaked just like arts participation did in 2020, and then went down again. And stabilized now in 2022, but that decline was still evident. And you can look at, well, what are people doing alternatively? And we can see the other things that have jumped would have been around digital arts engagement, particularly the allure of the streaming services such as Amazon Prime and Netflix and so on, and other forms of digital engagement, whether around social media that we saw in the very earlier charts. Those are the kind of things that are putting pressure on readership levels, but at least they've stabilized in the past 12 months when we saw that in 2022. And that reading for pleasure in terms of the demographics, it's always shown a particular demographic spike. Readership levels much stronger amongst women, and also much stronger ABC1. And in terms of that pattern, that has remained the same. Okay, so a lot of what we've looked at has been behavioral. It's about how we behave in terms of attending arts events, participating in the arts, which media sources we use. And now we're going to move on to the final section of the presentation, which is in relation to our national attitudes towards the arts. And we were particularly careful in our design of this list of attitudes back in 2018, because this really was an area where we felt it would be very important to track how national attitudes evolve over time. And luckily enough, the attitudes we chose in 2018 still seem particularly relevant to us. And so we haven't changed this section a great deal. And in terms of topics, The attitudes cover cultural value, diversity, quality, economic value, social value, personal well-being, and arts transactions. So what I mean there is we'll ask people the extent to which they agree that the arts play an important and valuable role in Irish society, that Ireland is a creative nation, how much they agree that there are equal opportunities for everyone living in Ireland to attend and participate in the arts in Ireland should receive public funding, the arts locally help give my county or region a distinctive identity, the arts make for a richer and more meaningful life, the arts play a significant part in my life. And so everyone is asked this question every year, and they're asked the extent to which they agree with them on a 5-point scale. I strongly agree, I slightly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree slightly, disagree strongly. And here are the overall results. And I just want you to look at this chart visually for the moment, in that look at the amount of green, because the green is I agree. Yeah. So there's a huge amount of agreement there. And look at the amount of pink. The pink there is for I disagree. Yeah. And you can see that the pink is rarely very prominent. There's some areas where it is, and we'll come back to those. But what you have here is agreement, a positive attitude nationally towards the arts across multiple criteria. And that's very encouraging. There's also something else in that when you look at research results a lot, you do note there's a pretty big distinction between people saying they strongly agree with something and people saying they agree. And it's sort of this, when people say they strongly agree with something, there's a much stronger emotional component to their response. I suppose what I mean by that is that they really mean it, and that their support for agreement with that sentiment is unlikely to change. Disagreement is still relevant, but softer. And softer to the extent that it's less likely to inform or motivate actual relevant behavior. And so what you also, while within the context of having this national support in relation to attitudes towards the art, there is consistently a certain softness to it, and that you can see for most of the criteria, the level of agree is higher than the level of strongly agree. And sometimes it's very evident. So, you know, you take an example like the arts locally help give my county or region a distinctive identity. You know, 80% of us more or less agree with that. But we're much more likely to say we agree rather than give that additional commitment of we really agree, strongly agree. So that's a sort of an overall picture. It's very difficult to sort of show how the pattern is moving. But if we just do a summary for all the statements of what percentage say strongly agree on average, what percentage say agree, neither, and so on, and see how that has changed. So just keep an eye on the strongly agree figure, because ultimately the disagree figure rarely moves. But there's two things here to note. That pattern of agree always being stronger than strongly agree, always, yeah, agree always being higher than strongly agree, has always been the case. Yeah. But what we should note is the level of strongly agree. So here it was pre-COVID, sort of about 30%. And then it took this dip during COVID. And we often noted that in relation to other things. It seemed like we had a finite capacity to care about various different things. And we were so preoccupied with public health in 2020 that we became less engaged with other things. The other things were less important in our worldview. However, bounce back. As soon as COVID started to relax, our attitudes towards the arts became more important, and they have ultimately returned to their traditional positive level after the sharp dip in COVID, because what we're seeing post-COVID is pretty much exactly what we saw pre-COVID. And the other thing we can note here is that demographically, there's this consistent pattern. There's some variation. In terms of the average strongly degree, it's stronger amongst women, but it's not bad amongst men. It's very consistent by age. There's a variation in social grade. It's stronger amongst ABC1s, but not huge. Slightly higher in Dublin, but not massively. Across, it does vary by arts attendee groups. So those who attend more often are more likely to be passionate about the arts, but that makes sense. But these summary attitudes are largely consistent across the demographic groups. And so if we focus now on this, just the strongly agree, we then start to see if we just focus on that response, we start to see the pattern really in the national results. The one that we're most likely to agree with is that Ireland is a creative nation. I think we take pride in that, in our record of achievement in terms of our artistic figureheads, but also that generally as a nation, within that Celtic gene, there's a strong kernel of creative aptitude. And also, if we look at others here, there's a group here that are very strong and very similar. It starts here that the arts make for a richer and more meaningful life. And it goes here that the arts in Ireland should receive public funding. The arts from different cultures gives an insight into the lives of people from different cultures. As much importance should be given to providing arts amenities as is given to providing sports amenities. And then it sort of goes down a little bit. Remember that the arts locally help give my county or region a distinctive identity. That little lower. And then there's one here, though, that's a negative. And that is, I cannot afford to attend as many arts events as I might wish. And you now had 23% of Irish adults agreeing with that, strongly agreeing with that, to the point where, it was that they were making choices of not going to things. And if we look at the changes over time, it was one of those areas where we were seeing typically positive movements, small ones, but typically encouraging. And that goes back to our review of the average, that the national sentiment towards the arts had generally gone back to the positive pre-COVID levels. There was, however, a big watch out, that the biggest movement year on year was in relation to this negative statement. I cannot afford to attend as many arts events as I might wish. That was 17% in 2021. And the average pre-COVID, or the average over time was about 20%. It had shot up in the 12-month period from 17 to 23%. So that was really noteworthy. And it also connected back to, you remember that value for money measure we were looking at earlier, and how that had dropped. Satisfaction with value for money with arts attendance had dropped by 9%. And now you were looking at this in terms of the cost. And this was in late 2022. So that 6% year-on-year rise of those who strongly agree that they cannot afford to attend as many arts events as I might wish. Okay, I appreciate it. I've taken you through a lot there, and we're finishing just about right on time for the presentation at least. So I wanted to put it all together on one slide, just as a reference point. So this isn't, you have to make decisions about what key points you leave in and leave out. But here's a sort of a one-page reference then in terms of what we've gone through, and we'll go through them in sequence from top to bottom. So in terms of attendance, the estimate of decline in actual attendance in late 2022 since COVID was 28%. And the reasons given primarily related to COVID, or that they often did. And the incidence of attendance was less of an issue than the frequency, which has contracted significantly. So if you looked at it, if you put 30 people in the room, about 25, 26 of them were attending the arts, more or less, as they had pre-COVID. But rather than going 7 or 8 times a year, they were going 4 or 5 times a year. And that was the big difference in terms of attendance and ticket sales. There was a note of optimism, albeit it was cautious optimism. 39% of adults were planning to attend more often in 2023. And also there was this recruitment, which applied both to attendees and also participants, that we had very healthy numbers of attendees and participants who were exploring a new arts form, a new art type of arts event for the first time. And then we looked at the barriers we had to overcome to bring people back to arts attendance. And those barriers were very much focused on time and money. And that was related to other things that what we saw across the survey. The value for money assessment of arts attendance, the 6% rise in the percentage of adults who said they cannot afford to attend as much as they want. And then in terms of sources, when we looked at media sources, when we looked at pre and post COVID, the changes couldn't have been more stark. Our sources for finding out about the arts have changed significantly since COVID. And basically what it was that the roles of traditional media and online media had fundamentally switched in terms of importance. And that was for the nation as a whole and was magnified even more when we focused exclusively on young adults. And there was another thing there in terms that digital engagement of all sorts, whether it be listening to music, watching TV, or more creative expressions, were invariably higher amongst young adults. However, the exception there was that they weren't particularly higher when you talked about engaging with arts and drama online. So that was potentially a development area and a recruitment opportunity there. Another more positive note was what we saw in participation, in that the national incidence of participating in the arts was on the rise again and was getting back to broadly comparable to what we'd seen pre-COVID. And also there was this real indication of national appetite for trying new things when it came for arts participation. It was very strong. And then finally, in terms of attitudes, again, another more positive sentiment. Attitudes towards the arts had also returned to their more traditionally positive level after the sharp dip we had seen in COVID. The year-on-year comparisons against both 2021 and the research series show typically positive movements across practically all attitudinal statements. So I hope that was very helpful.